The meta. You've definitely heard of it, especially if you've spent any amount of time gaming online or playing any sort of multiplayer experience. It always rears its ugly head at some point of a multiplayer competitive game's life. First though, exactly what is it? Meta is a prefix meaning referring to itself. This has evolved into a variety of meanings used in common parlance today. In games specifically, meta refers to the strongest strategies at that moment in time, based on balancing or imbalances of a game. For example, in League of Legends, the meta is whatever champions are strongest at the moment, and champions that counter the strongest. This fluctuates on a weekly basis due to patches by the developers seeking to balance the game. Conversely, in a single-player game like Dark Souls, meta can develop based on players min-maxing and discovering the most powerful builds in a larger strategic gameplay encompassing the regular game. However, in this video I want to discuss the meta in competitive multiplayer games and how different games approach balancing multiplayer gameplay. In short, the meta is simply another version of min-maxing. You play to certain characters' strengths, exploit other characters' weaknesses. The concept of a meta is something that most naive gamers never go into games knowing about. In a way, the establishment of an overbearing meta is somewhat parallel to a loss of innocence in competitive multiplayer games. Why, you might ask? Because the meta is based around players exploiting imbalances in the game's ecosystem. In the first few weeks of a competitive multiplayer game, the meta is yet to develop because players are still figuring out how to play, what characters are good at what, how characters mesh with others, how builds can be effective, and more. This is why you see a lot of pining for Season 1 of League of Legends, or I miss release week of Overwatch, because in the early days of a competitive multiplayer game, all players are naive to the meta. Anything can work, and there's a feeling of almost endless possibility because of that. So, why can an overbearing metagame be harmful to competitive multiplayer games? Because meta can shoehorn players into specific strategies and discourage any other type of experience in the game. For example, in Overwatch's current meta, there are 11 characters out of the roster of 26 that see zero or almost zero competitive play. That's nearly half the roster. This can get tiring to veteran players who have seen the same scenarios, the same team comps, the same strategies over and over and over. Stagnant meta sucks the soul out of competitive multiplayer games by stifling creativity, and it's also the reason why breaking the meta gets met with being ostracized by the general community. There's been a very real effect between Seasons 2 and 3 of Overwatch, in which players who used to play Reinhardt, an almost 100% pick, stop playing him anymore or say they don't want to play him anymore because these players are simply tired of repeating the same experience over and over. Reinhardt at the time was definitively the best designed tank hero in the game, and there was no alternative to him because all map choke points happened to be Reinhardt shield sized, and no other tank heroes in the game function as well as him as a tank. This is why you commonly see weekly balance patches in competitive multiplayer games, the buffing of low tier characters in hope that they see some play, and the nerfing of high tier characters so that they're not completely overwhelming. But let's play devil's advocate here, and think about why a slower developing meta may be somewhat good. Meta can serve as a roadmap for new players entering the competitive multiplayer scene. They might say, I don't know what this character does, but he looks cool so I'm going to try him, and the first thing they do is look up a build online. This build would never exist without the meta, and thus would probably make the learning curve of the game much more steep for the player if it wasn't available. In short, by following the meta, a player can more easily learn how to play the game and eventually start to think for themselves and theory craft their own strategies and playstyle based around it. In addition to this, meta can also help account for player skill. A player might say, I don't have the requisite skill to play a sniper, so I'm going to pick Bastion. You can be skill capped with Bastion, but people can still pick Pharah or Genji to counter you. No amount of Bastion skill will significantly make up for that. But it provides a temporary stepping stone for a player to learn the mechanics of the game, and why characters are good in some aspects and terrible in others. Games like League of Legends and Overwatch attempt to prevent stagnant meta by releasing weekly patches, keeping a close watch on player trends and data, and adjusting the game accordingly. Hell, Riot Games has even taken the meta into their own hands and started promoting different types of play between competitive seasons, adding radical changes to the balancing of the champions and gameplay and the addition of removal of items. The drawback to this, however, is that in making a game that constantly changes, you're bound to alienate certain players who like a specific meta or get attached to strategies that get countered by your new meta. For example, the changes that Riot made to League of Legends in Season 5 of the game, while logically healthy for the longevity of the game, left a lot of veteran players feeling lost. In the pursuit of strategic diversity, League of Legends evolved overnight into a game that was almost completely unrecognizable from last season. Tower changes, attempts to slow split push strategies, dragon changes from gold to passive buffs, and jungle changes adding new camps and mini buffs, all of these contributed to alienating veteran players. Thus far, we've discussed how meta can interact in a binary way with multiplayer games, both in being too slow and too fast for players to have fun playing. But both of these situations have one commonality. Changes to the meta are made by devs in reaction to player actions. The third, and perhaps most healthy way to create a long-lasting multiplayer experience is to have the meta evolve organically as players find new ways to play your game. Provide players with the tools to be creative with strategies, rather than adding and removing tools at their disposal and limiting their possibilities. Great examples of this can be seen in older fighting games and older RTS games, where matchups and tiers can be a huge factor in mid to high leveled play. In these games, character balance isn't the deciding factor when it comes to having a fun experience. It's more about the playstyle and flexibility of the characters themselves. If the game allows you to use a character in a way that fits you, you can overcome counters or bad matchups by adjusting your playstyle instead of going back to pick a different character. In League of Legends and Overwatch, however, characters are categorized so tightly to their specific roles that if your pick doesn't work well in a situation, it probably never will. Which is why some games can be dragged down by a stagnant meta, while others with little to no balance patches can evolve organically over the years. The argument could be made that these games are both a different type of multiplayer than League of Legends and Overwatch. RTS and fighting games require little or no teamwork and competition, choosing instead to focus on individual skill. As a result of this, how good a player is versus another is based more on how they choose to play, rather than how their skills are in specific roles. For example, in Smash Bros., you see a diversity of character picks in all levels of play. Sure, you have a meta that is somewhat enforced through tier lists of characters, but regardless of whether or not a player follows the meta, they can win with enough individual skill. Case in point, in 2014 a pro Smash player named Boss won a tournament with Luigi, which was previously considered a low tier character. He exemplified breaking the meta in Smash by showcasing his unique take on the character, something that couldn't really ever happen in a game like League of Legends or Overwatch. You're just never going to see a character become relevant outside of how they're classed in those games. Symmetra isn't suddenly going to become a better healer just because you play her differently, nor would Janna suddenly beat Katarina in a fight because of a unique take on her playstyle. In conclusion, I leave you with a quote by Rella, a pro Battlefield player. It's very important to understand that the spirit of competition is not the spirit of the game. The competition means players will use everything that is authorized to win. It's the game itself that has to propose them skill-based or demanding gameplays, sufficiently efficient to be selected at the expense of less impressive and demanding gameplays.